This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us for this first half hour of CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Voters head to the polls today in one of the most intensely fought midterm elections. Our Mark Martin joins us now with more on this story. He'll be following it for us throughout the day. Mark?
Yeah, Ephraim, today, of course, is the midterm elections, and the voters will head to the polls to determine if Republicans or Democrats retain or take control of Congress in our nation's capital and state houses around the country. More than 105 million Americans are expected to cast their ballots. Around 36 million have already done that, taking part in early voting. So what's on the ballot? On the national level, all 435 seats in the House are being voted on, as well as 35 seats in the Senate. Democrats need to win 23 seats to take control of the House, and they need 2 seats to do that in the Senate. Major issues in this election cycle include immigration and health care. President Donald Trump will spend Election Day at the White House. He held 44 rallies leading up to the midterm elections in support of the GOP. Former President Barack Obama also held rallies stumping for Democrats.
Democrats are inviting caravan after caravan, isn't that nice, of illegal aliens?
Unlike some people, I don't just make stuff up when I'm talking. I've got facts to back me up.
ABC News reported that the midterms are being called an election about everything. The author of the popular book, The Trump Prophecies, says they're the most important midterm elections in American history. And also at stake, voters in 36 states will choose a governor. And to give you an idea of how important Americans are viewing this election, we mentioned at least 36 million Americans have already voted, casting their ballots in early voting. In the last midterms at this point, that number was 20 million. Ephraim?
Well, how does the midterm turnouts compare to the turnout for presidential elections?
Well, turnouts in the midterms are traditionally quite a bit lower than presidential elections. For example, in the midterms, it's around 40% of eligible voters, whereas in presidential, it can hit as high as 60%. But one estimate had this year's midterm elections at 45% of eligible voters casting their ballots. And that's a figure that hasn't been seen in nearly half a century.
All right, a big day indeed. Thank
Yes,
you, Mark,
it
for
is.
that report. On this election day, Vice President Mike Pence tells CBN News he believes Republicans will expand their majority in the Senate and keep the House. CBN's David Brody traveled with him on Air Force Two for the final push to get out the vote. Here's David's report.
Well, but you can see it. You see the enthusiasm.
You can feel it. You can feel it.
With his wife Karen by his side, we spent the final hours of these midterms on Air Force Two with an optimistic vice president. From Montana to South Dakota.
Hello, South Dakota!
The crowds were enthusiastic, as was the VP.
The blue wave. We were just on Air Force One the other day. The president says the blue wave's dead. What's the answer on the blue wave we're hearing so much
Well, we think
about?
the blue wave's going to hit a red wall all across this country. I think we're going to expand our majority in the United States Senate.
You do.
I really believe we're going to hold the House of Representatives.
First stop, Montana, where the goal is to defeat a Senate Democrat living in big sky Trump country.
How much is John Tester in trouble here in Montana?
We think Matt Rosendale is in a great position to win this race. John Tester has been voting with the liberal agenda in the United States Senate every step of the way, voted more than 90% of the time with President Obama's agenda. That's not Montana.
Pence's final pitch to voters is pretty simple and to the point.
Think about 4.5 million new jobs created, unemployment at a 50-year low. We're rebuilding our military, constitutional conservatives being appointed to our courts. And that's exactly what the president and I told the American people that we would do. And the Democrats, by contrast, it's been an agenda of obstruction.
But Democrats are fired up and turned off by this administration's policies. Immigration is close to the top of the list.
What do you make of some of the rhetoric coming, what they say is from this administration, on immigration?
We have a crisis of illegal immigration at our southern border. This caravan that's moving north is deeply concerning to people all across this country. I hear about it every day. It's the reason why the president's made it clear that the caravan will not be allowed to enter our country illegally. And we're taking decisive steps to administratively close the loopholes that human traffickers use to exploit vulnerable families and entice them to take the long and dangerous journey north.
Motivating the faithful base is Pence's main chore.
So if you're taking notes, I need you to vote.
If Republicans do well Tuesday night, Pence is pretty clear that the nonstop effort from President Trump will be a main reason.
Even though he's not on the ballot, he's campaigned as though we were. And I think that's the reason why we've seen such energy around the country. To be honest with you, David, as I've traveled around the country, I haven't seen this level of enthusiasm since the days just before the 2016 campaign.
Whatever happens Tuesday night, Mike Pence sees a larger hand at work in the country.
There seems to have been a cultural slide, obviously, for decades in this country. And along comes Donald Trump, God using imperfect people to accomplish his perfect will. What do you make of what's happened in this country since he's become president, and how you see this divinely, providentially playing out?
Well, I believe, as every president from George Washington forward, I believed in the role of providence in the life of this nation. And I really do believe that the prayers of the American people have made a difference. And even in these divided times, I really do believe those prayers are a pathway to heal our country and continue to move our nation forward.
The nation will soon find out what direction that means for the next 2 years. David Brody, CBN News, on Air Force Two with the Vice President.
Let's do it.
Most pundits consider this year's midterm elections one of the most important in decades, and that will have a profound impact on the U.S. And Chris Mitchell is reporting from Jerusalem now. Israelis are also considering how the midterms will affect the Jewish state.
For the past 2 years, many Israelis agree with President Trump's policies. He moved the U.S. Embassy behind me to Jerusalem. He pulled out of the Iranian nuclear deal, and he drew closer to Israel's neighbors like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan. Head out to Jerusalem's open-air market, Mahane Yehuda, and you can find that reflected among Israelis talking about the midterms.
I'm sure Israelis as a whole, probably if a poll were to be done, Israelis as a whole would probably be more in favor of the GOP doing well in these elections.
I think the Democrats are terrible for Israel.
Why?
Why? They've taken a very hard left turn, and their policies are not pro-Israel.
You can safely say, and I've been polling this since the elections, the presidential elections, Israelis love Trump. And that he's only gained in popularity here. And there are a number of reasons, both his personality, he's very blunt, and the way that he has defended Israel in the United Nations and really shaken up the United Nations with Ambassador Haley and with the policies. That's music to Israeli ears.
Pollster Mitchell Barak says Israelis favor certain candidates.
They seem to want candidates that are more pro-Israel. That tends to be Republicans. That tends to be the candidates from the Evangelical community, from the South.
The question is, will Congress, beginning January 2019, will Congress provide tailwind or headwind to the president's national security policy?
Ambassador Yoram Ettinger served as Israel's liaison to the U.S. Congress and knows the importance of these elections for the House, Senate, and Israel.
We should never underestimate the power of the legislature. The legislature can provide very, very intense headwind to American presidents, which would transform an American president into a very weak personality in global politics. I trust that reflecting the majority of the American population, the coming Congress, beginning January 2019, will be as supportive of enhanced U.S.-Israel relations.
Whatever the outcome of the elections, the results will have an effect beyond the borders of the U.S. to Israel, the Middle East, and beyond. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
And you can watch election coverage on our CBN News channel this evening. To find the channel in your area, simply go to CBN News website. Our election coverage will also air live on the Freeform channel at 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Here now is a look at some of the other major stories we're following for you today inside the CBN Newsroom. Severe weather across the country could keep people from the polls today. Rain, wind, and strong thunderstorms are expected to sweep across the East Coast. The Weather Channel reports the north central U.S. will see heavy snowfall and wet rain, as well as a snow mix. Recent studies found that Republican candidates tend to have a slight advantage when it rains. The U.S. Supreme Court announced Monday it will make a decision on the potential destruction of a World War I veterans memorial shaped in the form of a cross. In 2015, a lower court ruled the memorial was not constitutional, declaring the shape of the memorial violating the First Amendment. The American Humanist Association wants the cross to be destroyed or changed. The Supreme Court will hear the appeal on whether to reverse that decision. Armed separatists have kidnapped at least 79 students and their principal from a Presbyterian school in Cameroon. The kidnapping took place late Sunday by men who call themselves Amba Boys. That's a reference to the state of Ambazonia that armed separatists are trying to establish. The men say they will only release the children when they achieve what they want and after the children struggle. You can find these and other stories on our website, CBN News, throughout the day. Coming up, the leaders of Iran make plans to ignore newly issued U.S. sanctions. We're going to break down what it means for the country. Stay with us. And welcome back to CBN NewsWatch. This week, the Trump administration raised economic sanctions against Iran. The new sanctions are aimed at isolating the country's banking sector and slashing its oil exports. Our George Thomas reports.
More than 24 hours after the United States slapped Iran with some of the toughest sanctions ever to hit the Islamic regime, residents of the capital city, already facing economic dire straits, are bracing for even more pain.
The sanctions have greatly affected our lives 100%.
Everything from food, transportation, housing, and medical costs have risen dramatically.
High prices negatively impact every individual and every family.
Mina Soleil, who is visiting Tehran, fears this second round of sanctions will lead to more unemployment and hyperinflation.
Prices for shoes and clothes have gone up very high, and a lot of people are not able to buy these things anymore.
Some hope the economic pain will bring Iranians to the streets to protest the Islamic regime and call for its end, as they did last year and in 2009. The White House says the aim of the economic penalties is simple.
Our objective is to starve the Iranian regime of the revenue it uses to fund violent and destabilizing activities throughout the Middle East and indeed around the world.
In all, the U.S. government has sanctioned more than 900 Iran-related targets in the last 2 years. Secretary Pompeo says the Islamic regime has a clear choice.
It can either do a 180-degree turn from its outlaw course of action and act like a normal country, or it can see its economy crumble.
Thousands of Iranians responded to the new sanctions by chanting "Death to America, death to Israel," and burning U.S. and Israeli flags. They even squeezed in military drills in the northern part of the country in defiance, as the government vowed to circumvent U.S. sanctions and keep selling its oil. Iran's supreme leader, speaking on the eve of the anniversary of the November 4th, 1979 takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, used the occasion to accuse Washington of waging military, economic, and propaganda wars. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei told the crowd that America's influence was in decline.
America's power and hegemony in the world is declining and moving toward destruction. It's waning year by year.
But it is America that's putting the squeeze on the regime at the moment, and the White House says that pressure will be relentless until Iran changes its revolutionary course. George Thomas, CBN News.
Still ahead, Eric Metaxas introduces us to the cast of characters in his new children's book, Donald Drains the Swamp. The work of best-selling author Eric Metaxas include both funny and serious angles for children as well as adults. Now, his latest book about President Trump embodies all of those qualities, actually. Our Jennifer Wishon met up with him in New York City.
We caught up with Eric Metaxas while he was hosting his radio show.
It's kind of scary to me, the power that Facebook has.
With his new book, Donald Drains the Swamp, proudly displayed beside his microphone. It's a tale about a character called Donald the Caveman, based on a true story.
So Eric.
Yes.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther.
Yeah.
Donald the Caveman.
Yes.
It's quite a progression.
Thank you. It's not a progression. It's either a regression or nothing at all.
People, it's kind of a funny thing. I'm very eclectic. I've always been that way.
He's not kidding. The conservative Christian has written critically acclaimed biographies, more than 30 children's books, even scripts for the popular cartoon VeggieTales. And his latest book is a mashup of political humor, serious lessons about liberty, and the good things Metaxas sees happening in America under this president.
This presidency, there's something about it. He has a folk hero quality. It's like an American folk hero. Who is this guy?
Do you see this as a children's book, or do you see it as a, it's good for everybody to read?
When I wrote this book originally, I was really thinking of a humor book for adults. A humor book about Donald the caveman. He drains the swamp. And there's a lot of political humor in here that's specifically for adults. Kids aren't going to get it. But if you do it just right, you do it in a way that doesn't exclude kids. You do it in a way that's sweet and innocent. This book is not nasty, it's not mean, it's meant to be lighthearted and fun.
Well, speaking of some of the adult humor in the book, there's a Georgosaurus.
The Georgosaurus, that's just a joke. We had no idea that there's a Hungarian billionaire Satan worshiper named George Soros, so make of it what you will.
There's also a blue bird that flits through the book, and as you know, birds like to tweet, so make of it what you will. Why is it following Donald around? Well, that you can figure that out.
And I mean, to be fair, there's also a turtle in here who looks a lot like the Senate Majority Leader.
Well, to be really fair, and this is not a knock on turtles, but all turtles somehow end up looking like the Senate Majority Leader. It's not their fault. It's not his fault. It's just a quirk of nature.
So why did he portray the president as a caveman?
Sometimes we think he's a little bit of a caveman, this president, but he's our caveman. He's working for us. That's the key. He's working for us.
Well, I think the power of the Trump presidency is in its simplicity. The fact that he's driven so much by his gut, his boldness,
right.
That I think is portrayed here.
But that's exactly right. That's part of the issue of the caveman, right? The caveman is not self-conscious. He just does what he has to do. He clubs the animal, he eats it. There's something funny about that this president is so motivated by his gut, his instincts, that it is almost funny. You don't think of him he's the antithesis of Obama. Obama was paralyzed by overthinking things. It was kind of a Hamlet-like paralysis. He was unable to do anything, and you thought, is he even in the White House? Is Daddy home? What is going on? Do we have a president? This president, you sort of feel just the opposite.
Metaxas is on a mission to make Americans think. Along with his best-selling books, here in New York City, he hosts a lecture series called Socrates in the City, where he and his guests tackle big issues like God, science, and culture. He understands why some voters, particularly Christians, may have to hold their noses when it comes to some of Trump's tactics.
Oh, listen, you have to understand, voting for Trump is not necessarily a vote for Trump. It's a vote for the people he's going to affect. God holds us accountable. He doesn't say, well, if you don't like this or you don't like the way he combs his hair, don't vote for him. If you don't vote for the person you think is going to do the best job, they may not be perfect, but the other person's going to get in. And I think that Christians, sometimes we feel like, well, I'm going to be really holy and I'm not going to get my hands dirty. I think God calls us to get our hands dirty. We're living in such divided times. We need to laugh. We need to be able to celebrate the good things that are happening. So that's why I wrote the book.
And this isn't Donald the Caveman's only adventure. Look for Donald Builds the Wall, even Donald Goes to Space, coming soon. He hopes this latest book winds up under lots of Christmas trees this year, so more Americans better understand the importance of draining the swamp. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, New York City.
And Donald Drains the Swamp is available right now wherever books are sold. Stay with us. We'll be right back with much more of CBN NewsWatch straight ahead. And welcome back to CBN NewsWatch right now. It is time for your Tuesday Tweetable. Here's a message I hope you will find uplifting and certainly hope you'll be encouraged to post, to tag, to tweet, and to share this message with others. This moment in your life is not the end. I don't care how bad or good it may feel in this moment. Guess what? God has so much more, so much better in store for you. There's a song that says it all. Better days are coming, and they indeed are. Remember that God causes all things to work together for your good, so long that you love Him and you are called according to His purpose. With that word, I strongly encourage you to make this a terrific Tuesday. Remember that you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about always at cbnnews.com. If you're watching us here on the CBN News channel, there is much more of the CBN NewsWatch program coming up right after this short break. For all others, we want to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, on Twitter, as well as Instagram. Certainly hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make this a terrific Tuesday, and remember the news continues 24/7 at cbnnews.com. We're updating it all day this election day. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye, everybody, and God bless.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us for the second half hour of CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. More than 105 million Americans are expected to cast ballots today, and some 36 million have already done so in early voting. All 435 seats in the House are on the ballot and 35 seats in the Senate. Democrats need to win 23 seats to take control of the House. They just need 2 seats in the Senate to do that. Major issues in this election include immigration and health care. And President Donald Trump will spend this election day at the White House, following 44 rallies in support of the GOP during this election cycle. Former President Barack Obama also held rallies stumping for Democrats.
Democrats are inviting caravan after caravan, isn't that nice, of illegal aliens.
Unlike some people, I don't just make stuff up when I'm talking. I've got facts to back me up.
ABC News reports the midterms are an election about everything. CBN News' chief political correspondent David Brody hit the final leg of the campaign trail with Vice President Mike Pence Monday. We're going to have an exclusive report on today's 700 Club from him. Evangelicals were a key voting bloc in the 2016 presidential race, and candidates are seeking their vote in this election as well. Ed Stetzer is the executive director of the Billy Graham Center at Wheaton College. He spoke with our Heather Sells with more insight on where evangelicals stand heading into this election.
Ed, we have seen the president stoke fears over immigration this week in an effort apparently to get out the vote. He's even tweeted a video that blames Democrats for the crimes of immigrants. How do you think those who adhere to evangelical beliefs are responding to all this inflammatory rhetoric around immigration?
Well, I think for a lot of people, it's actually going to probably work. We actually see that immigration among those evangelicals who voted for President Trump in the recent research we did is actually their number 2 most important issue, economy being number 1. And evangelicals in general, we look at several polls that have recently come out, they would be the most hard line on immigration. You know, and again, people can debate about numbers and how this all works, but certainly immigration as a concern resonates with evangelical voters.
That's really interesting. It almost seems that fear is more motivating than say, a positive message.
Well, I think if that were not the case, our airwaves would not be filled with negative ads every single day. Of course, I live in the Chicagoland area, and it's quite remarkable the level of fear and negativity that the ads communicate. And I do think, and you know, the reality is people have to decide how they're going to respond to that fear. I think there's a very good case to be made that you could have a debate about numbers of immigration and you know how many people should come through and how to best secure the border. That's not the debate we're having right now. We're using words like invasion, which really don't make sense in the current situation. We're using words that are intended to incite fear. I think what we'll find, and we're already finding, is that's turning off particularly Republican white women in the suburbs, particularly suburbs of major cities that typically vote Republicans. So my guess is we'll see a whole lot of people, a whole lot of congressmen lose their seats in those kind of districts where it is probably securing the vote in places like senator races in Tennessee and Montana and other places like that. So certainly it's not an uncalculated reality. I mean, this horde, as some might call, caravan of poor unarmed people, others might call, is not going to arrive here until long after the election. And I'm not the first person to predict that you probably won't hear much more about this after next week, after the election's over.
Ed, the survey that you did of the 2016 voters also paints a picture of many evangelicals voting for Trump 2 years ago because they cared about more long-term conservative goals as opposed to being enthusiastic for him personally as a candidate. And this week, the president told CBN News that nobody's done more for Christians or evangelicals than I have. Do you think evangelicals see him as really advancing their cause?
I think so. Yeah, I think that phrase, they see him as advancing their cause. Yes, for many, they're uneasy that he's the person who's advancing their cause. I mean, this is a thrice married adulterer who uses language that evangelicals are shocked and stunned by, who died. And I could list 50 other things. No reason to go through all that. We've already had those discussions. But I do think that it makes many uneasy. What we found is, though evangelicals did overwhelmingly support, particularly white evangelicals, overwhelmingly supported President Trump, then candidate Trump. Part of it is they felt that this was the best choice they had. People often forget now, we're 2 years in, there was another candidate and her name was Hillary Clinton. And even Slate magazine wrote an article talking about how badly she sought to, or didn't seek to engage evangelicals, how poorly she engaged evangelicals. So what we found in the research is there are some people who are all in. There are some people who are all in for President Trump. Evangelicals are all in. And there's a whole lot who are kind of like, this was the choice that I had to make, and I wish he wouldn't tweet, and I wish he wouldn't say these things. So, people vote for complex reasons, and there's not an evangelical voter. There's a whole lot of people come to a whole lot of different choices. And so we saw that in the data, and we'll probably see that in the exit polls that come out during the midterm elections next week as well, because if you live in Chicagoland, President Trump's not on the ballot, but every commercial I've seen, he's on the ballot. I'm guessing that's true around the whole country.
Right. It really is interesting how he is the face right now. Well, Ed Stetzer, thanks so much for your time, and we look forward to delving into this more after the election.
In the battle for control of the Senate, one of the hottest races is now in West Virginia, where Democratic Senator Joe Manchin faces a serious challenge from the state's Republican Attorney General. As Jennifer Wishon reports, if the incumbent was any other Democrat than Manchin, the Republican would likely win.
Over the past 20 years, the Mountaineer state has done a political somersault, flipping from deep blue to reliably red. Its entire congressional delegation is Republican, except for its senior senator, Democrat Joe Manchin, who's facing a challenge from State Attorney General Patrick Morrisey. He's West Virginia's first Republican AG in nearly 80 years. As a Senate candidate, he's taking full advantage of enthusiasm for President Trump, who won the state with nearly 70% of the vote.
Pro-life, pro-gun, pro-coal, pro-Trump.
I'm Patrick Morrisey, and I'm your conservative fighter.
And in this new red state, he's painting his opponent as out of touch.
Liberal Joe's got to go. Amen, brothers.
Manchin is playing a trump card too, reminding voters that he chooses West Virginia over party, like his well-timed vote to confirm Justice Kavanaugh.
I'm Joe Manchin, and I approve this message because for me, all roads lead to West Virginia.
And he's not letting the loss of the NRA's endorsement to Morrisey stop him from showing off his gun rights bona fides.
Now the threat is Patrick Morrisey's lawsuit to take away health care from people with pre-existing conditions. He is just dead wrong.
Pro-life groups are taking aim at Manchin for his lukewarm support for life. The Senate race coincides with a constitutional amendment that clarifies West Virginia neither secures nor protects the right to abortion. Here at the Romney Diner, voters are quick to share who they're supporting.
I'm going to vote for Morrisey.
For Gary Seville, it's simple. He's happy with President Trump and wants to send him a solid soldier.
That's what I want to see. Okay. Somebody will support him.
Quite frankly, Joe's the guy that needs to be in Washington.
Nicholson appreciates Manchin's willingness to cross the aisle and vote with Republicans.
Vote with your heart, not with your party. You got to go on your own gut belief and your research to make a decision. And yes, more people need to go across the aisle. There's no doubt about it.
Bill McDonald supported Manchin in the past, but he's voting for Morrisey. Look no farther than President Obama's energy policies, he says, to understand why so many West Virginians have switched parties.
We're proud, and we will not allow people to close our coal mines and to inundate us with opioids, okay, and take away our livelihood, and then they want to continue doing that, and they don't ever want to stop, they want to give up because of clean energy.
Morrisey took Obama's clean energy plan to the Supreme Court and won. Donna Hawk voted early, and for her, the answer was easy.
Mansion.
But she says the real solution to the problems here and the nation don't require an election.
We need to get back to God. They took God out of schools, kids went haywire, and we need that spiritual base. The spiritual base is the only thing that can fight the evilness.
If Manchin wins, he'll remain a sought-after swing vote. If Morrissey pulls off a victory, it will be huge for West Virginia Republicans and President Trump. Reporting from the Windy Mountains of West Virginia, Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
We're following close races in the Senate, the House, as well as governors' mansions across the country, and voter turnout will be the key to which party takes control. So CBN News hit the streets to hear directly from voters about what's driving them to the polls. Take a look.
Did you vote the last midterm cycle?
Yes, I did.
Yes, I vote every election.
But I don't really know where to go to vote, so.
Is there one particular issue driving you to the polls this year?
I think it's looking at jobs in particular, but how we are finding alternative ways to drive employment, not just manufacturing or industrial, but all the service industries, the technology sector. I think that's a really important focus.
No particular issue. I am big on education, prison reform, things like that.
No.
Honestly, I haven't been paying attention to the current administration, so I have no idea.
Do you pray for the elections?
Do I pray for the elections? I'm going to have to at this point.
I don't pray myself, but I support all of those who do. I think it's really important, whatever belief system that you have, or if you don't have a belief system.
No.
I pray for our country every night, yes.
Severe weather across the country could keep some people away from the polls today. High wind and strong thunderstorms are sweeping across the East Coast, and the Weather Channel reports the North Central will see heavy snowfall and a wet rain-snow mix. Recent studies have found Republican candidates tend to have a slight advantage when it does rain. CBN News will have continuing coverage of the election from 8 p.m. until 12 a.m. Eastern Time. Be sure to tune in and join us for that. Still to come here on CBN News, we're going to sit down with Tucker Carlson to talk about the meltdown in America. That is straight ahead after this short break. Stay with us. And welcome back to CBN NewsWatch. One of President Trump's latest taglines is jobs, not mobs. The point he's trying to make, some on the left are turning Democrats into the party of mob rule. Fox News' Tucker Carlson agrees with the president. He sat down with CBN's Jenna Browder.
Many of you know Tucker Carlson from Fox News, and now he's out with a new book, Ship of Fools, How a Selfish Ruling Class is Bringing America to the Brink of Revolution. I sat down with him to talk about it, then also another topic that's on a lot of people's minds right now, left-wing violence and protests. Meltdown in America. From Portland and San Francisco to the Supreme Court, many on the left are making their voices heard, sometimes in extreme ways.
So the Democratic Party obviously isn't in control of its crazy people on the street, okay? Those people are committing acts of violence. They don't want to admit that because they know it scares normal people. I mean, normal people who might vote Democrat are watching television. There's like an angry group of rich kids screaming at somebody or smashing car windows. They're not into that. Normal people are not into that at all. Even Democrats aren't into that. So the Democratic Party has to pretend it's not happening. And so immediately the media start telling you, no, there are no mobs.
When you see people like Ted Cruz getting chased out of restaurants by a mob.
You're not going to use the mob word here.
It's totally a mob.
Carlson says the media's problem is more than just a liberal-leaning bias.
They're not liberal. They're water carriers for the Democratic Party. If you want to know the way the media will present the news, look at what the Democratic Party's political objective is for the day. What are the party's talking points? And then go watch CNN, and they're identical.
But what about those who say there's also violence on the right?
Well, that's not true. I mean, are there crazy people on the right? Yeah, of course. Obviously. They're extremists on all sides, for sure. But what there isn't on the right now, and maybe it will change, but I'm trying to be as honest as I can be, There aren't groups of conservatives screaming at Democratic lawmakers in restaurants or on airplanes or in airports, and they're not actually smashing Starbucks windows and blocking traffic. I mean, that's Antifa. I mean, just as a matter of fact, being as honest as we can, right now in 2018, violent demonstrations on the street are overwhelmingly of the left. And this is the youth wing of the Democratic Party. So maybe that will change. But right now, why are we lying about this? These are progressives doing this, not conservatives.
The political temperature in America right now is no doubt hot. And come November, the controversy over the mob could be a factor to motivate voters. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Still ahead, some painful news for retirees. Give up 50% of your pension or risk losing it all. We're taking a look at a plan to save your pension. Cities across America face an economic time bomb. For decades, they've been promised hefty retirement packages. But in many cases, lawmakers haven't put enough money in those funds. Now, with baby boomers beginning to retire in big numbers, it is time for the governments to pay up. Here's Caitlin Burke.
Central Falls is Rhode Island's smallest city, but it's made some big headlines. In 2011, it became one of the first cities in the U.S. to file for municipal bankruptcy. After years of economic mismanagement, the city of 19,000 was broke. When something like this happens, cities face major cuts and sacrifices to get back on track. In the case of Central Falls, the state brought in retired state Supreme Court Justice Bob Flanders to help right the city's finances. And the sacrifice came from those expecting retirement payouts.
Bankruptcy is typically called a community of pain, where all the creditors share in the hardship and the pain caused by the bankrupt entity's inability to pay its bills. So here, because the state protected the bondholders, the entire restructuring had to be borne by both the retirees and the active employees.
It was in this auditorium back in 2011 that Judge Bob Flanders told a room full of pension earners that they had two options: risk losing the entire pension promised to them in retirement, or sacrifice 50% of it.
I had to deliver that very difficult and painful message to people who had retired relying on this, and so it was a horrible thing to have to do.
A pension is a promise. City employees like police and firefighters work for a set number of years at relatively low pay in exchange for higher guaranteed benefits once they retire.
In the case of police and fire in Central Falls, they were being allowed to retire after 20 years, and so the average age of these retirees was in their late 40s, 48, I believe. And so they typically still have many working years left, so they were able to obtain a pension and then go out and get another job someplace else and supplement their income for the rest of their working lives.
Decades went by in Central Falls, with each administration talking about better pensions and benefits. Meanwhile, no money was coming in to pay for those promises. Pension debt remains almost invisible. That is, until it's time for the city to pay retiring workers.
This is the poorest city in Rhode Island, and it hadn't seen any significant tax increases for years, despite ever richer pension benefits. So that ended up in a very bad situation where they couldn't pay their bills any longer.
Both active duty and retired Central Falls workers took an immediate hit.
Didn't know if you're going to get a paycheck every 2 weeks. So that first started. And on the same time, you're responding to dangerous calls. And so you're trying to separate your personal and professional opinion about what's going on, but you still have to do your job.
While those on active duty had time to work out a plan B, retired police and firefighters found themselves in a lurch.
It dramatically affected them. Two of the members I know, they had to go into foreclosure with their houses. And that's, it's 70 years old or in the 80s where you counted on this and you worked for this. And these are officers that did about 25 to 30 years on the job. It was hard to see. And we couldn't do anything for them ourselves, even from the perspective of the union, because we were all trying to fight for something.
CBN News reached out to several affected retirees. Their response? After years of fighting to get what they'd been promised, they feel worn down, defeated, and sick of talking about it. Plus, they're tired of seeing their loss used as a cautionary tale for other cities that probably won't pay any heed.
Putting your head in the sand about this like an ostrich isn't going to let the problem go away or get any less severe. It's one that continues to grow with each passing year. And so while the overwhelming temptation is to kick this can down the road as long and as hard as you can so you don't have to deal with it and you leave it for somebody else in the hope that you won't be there when everything explodes, that's obviously not a very good way of solving problems.
In Central Falls, Flanders recognized pension benefits as the biggest part of the problem. As painful as it was, he faced them, diffusing the time bomb.
In my judgment, it's a very effective remedy to deal with issues that, for whatever reason, politically have been unpalatable and unacceptable to the elected officials. So to bring in somebody like me from the outside that can have the power to restructure, not worrying about getting reelected or pleasing groups that helped him get elected or that funded his or her campaign, that is enormously helpful in order to get the job done.
Other cities should take note of Central Falls because their retiring workers will also expect to collect a pension. According to one report, however, more than half of the states aren't prepared to pay for the promises made to public employees. Still, someone must pay the price for this extremely broken system when the bill comes due. The question is who? Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Central Falls, Rhode Island.
Heartbreaking, yet another reason why Election Day is so important, to elect leaders who are prepared to handle the problem. Stay with us, we'll be right back. CBN International held its very first Superbook Pray Day in Thailand last weekend. More than 350 children and Sunday school teachers from 28 different countries used the Superbook curriculum and attended the event. It was filled with icebreaker games, worship, and creative prayer activities. They were centered around 3 topics: serve, equip, and inspire. Children drew what God spoke to their hearts and shared their testimonies. A teenage Christian rapper also performed and shared his own testimony, encouraging the children. You can learn more about what CBN is doing around the world by visiting cbn.com/international. Time now for your Tuesday Tweetable. It's a message I hope will inspire you and move you to post, tag, tweet, and share it with others. Live with a heart expecting great things from God. He's your Father, and He promised to do just that. His word says that He will do exceedingly abundantly and above all you could ever ask or think. So imagine great and watch God do even greater. With that word, I encourage you to make this a terrific Tuesday. That is going to do it for this half hour of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. You can also talk to us on Facebook, on Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Remember, the news continues 24/7 on the news channel as well as cbnnews.com. We'll see you back here a little bit later. God bless.